Hello everybody and welcome to the second episode of our Tandem Talks. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds to let more people join as we're expecting quite a lot of attendance today, which is great. Okay, we have quite a few people now. So welcome to the second episode of our Tandem Talks, which is our new thought leadership webinar series, where we'll be inviting HR leaders, business leaders and thought leaders to come and share their insights and expertise with us and to help us guide us through the path forward. So today we are delighted to be joined by the CEO of Virgin Media Ireland, Tony Hanway, and Tony will be discussing how to lead a high-performance culture through these challenging times with our Tandem CEO, Aisling Tlayard. So today the webinar will be being recorded so that we can send it to people that couldn't join us today. And we'd love this to be an interactive session and we'll be coming to some Q&A at the end. So please feel free to comment in the chat box or the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And we'll be sure to come to your questions at the end. So without further ado, I think I should pass over to Aisling and I hope you enjoy the session.
Hi everybody and welcome to our Tandem Talks. I'm delighted personally that Tony's joining us today because of course a long-time fan. I got to see him up close turning organisations around again and again, driving high-performance cultures. And I'm really intrigued because it's not often we get to look at the CEO side of performance and culture. We're often here talking to HR people. So I think this will be a really nice, fresh approach. So thanks, Tony, for joining us today.
Thanks, Aisling. Great to be here. Hello, everybody.
So we're going to kick off and get straight into it because I want to make sure that the audience gets time to get involved in the discussion, ask questions, send your comments throughout, and we'll interject them. But just to get the ball rolling and to kick us off, Tony, you've a long history and probably you're well known for being the kind of leader who turns organizations into high-performing cultures. You've done it again and again, and you seem to have that Midas touch wherever you go, that you find profitability and growth wherever you land. And my question to you is around how much culture plays a factor in that, and how much do you even think about that when you're leading businesses?
Yeah, well, I think culture plays a huge part, Aisling. I mean, of course, you could achieve results and not put a whole lot of effort into culture, but I don't think they'd be sustainable. So I think, culture is essential for building sustainable return to profitable growth or to maintain growth. So, I see it as totally indispensable, to be honest. There's a lot of debate around, can you create culture? How do you form culture? Does it exist already? And how much can you realistically change it? And I think that's, a very interesting debate and something that I think a lot of HR people, we could spend an awful lot of time discussing. But no, for me, it all starts with culture. And to be honest, it all starts with purpose as well. What's the purpose of the company? What's the organization trying to achieve? And then what's the culture needed to make that happen? So, it's a kind of, it's a chain of interconnected events and practices, I think, that actually add up to a sustainable high-performance culture.
Yeah, and is there particular ingredients that you think are in every culture you go to, or do you look at each of the cultures you go to uniquely and go, well, we'll just pull out the strengths here and work on them? Or do you go, well, every culture needs to at least have this stuff going on?
It's a very good question. I do think you have to say most culture, you have to start with context. I think, I don't think there's a one size fits all and just you bring a culture template, because every company is coming from a different perspective and a different history. It would have had different product set, different competitors, different history, maybe a history of growth, maybe a history of hyper growth, maybe a history of going backwards. Maybe a history or a culture of customer centricity, maybe a people-centric business, or maybe a business that wasn't very people-centric. A lot of that will come from the management and the leadership. So, in answer to your question, I think a lot of it is contextual. But I do think, from my perspective, that when coming to an organization, you do tend then to bring a set number of kind of bottom line practices and procedures that you would like to bring into most companies, like transparency, good communication, clear targets, measurability, leadership development, recognition of a job well done. All those things, definitely would be bringing them, but it would be in the context of where is the company at currently, and how has the company gone from, what has the company's journey been, and every single company has a unique story. Some go back decades, some are more recent, but they're all completely different and unique. And I think you have to spend the initial period in any job getting to understand that culture. It doesn't mean you accept that culture. It doesn't mean that you become part of the furniture, or you just, say, well, the culture's like this, so I'll adopt to it. But you have to understand how things have got to where they are right now. And I think that informs better decisions then going forward.
Yeah. And you mentioned leadership there, and, it's often, when we're dealing with clients and so on, it's the leadership practices that they're trying to influence. And I remember from working with you, you've always worked hard to make sure you have a strong leadership team around you, and that you optimize what they're doing. But how much do you think that leaders are born versus made? Like, do you give them practices that you think this will help you drive a high performing culture, or do you just make sure you have the right people around you?
Yeah, it's a bit of a combination, really. I do think it's essential to get the top team correct, get the right team. Remember that book, Jim Collins, Was It Good to Great, which, again, we could spend an hour talking about that book, and there's been plenty of people who have written books subsequently saying most of this isn't actually true or isn't correct. But it was actually one of the better business books, I think. It sticks in most of our minds, which is a sure sign, because, there's been thousands of business books, but only a couple of dozen actually really resonate and stick in your mind. But I remember he always used to say, get the right people on the bus. And then he said, but make sure they're sitting in the right seats on the bus. And I think that's a very good distinction, because, sometimes you've got great leaders, but they're actually in the wrong job. So one thing I think, and we spend quite a lot of time, is making sure we've got the right leaders on the bus, but that they're in the right seat and they're actually doing the right job. I'm a huge believer in job rotation and change. And I love seeing a leader that's, that he or she is making a lot of progress, and then actually add something extra to their job, or even better, take them out of the job they're in and away from the person they've been reporting to, and put them into a new team and a new division, and give them, I think, a new test, and sometimes a new lease of life as well. I think that's one of the saddest things about when you're a CEO. I always used to preach, you have to be changing job every 2 years. And when I say change a job, that may not mean you leave the job you're in, but it might mean a significant modification to the job you're in. And I think that's one of the saddest things about CEO, is when there's only one CEO, it's a bit more difficult to do that. But I wouldn't resile from that point. I love every 2 years for people to take on something new, a very big project, or a whole new unit, or even better still, completely change jobs, role, division. I think that it's essential for people to stay fresh, and to be greeted with a new set of challenges, and even better if they can have a new direct boss, then that's good. Because when you change bosses, it could be for better or it could be for worse, but you'll always learn something new from working with different people, with a different team, with a different set of peers, and a different boss, and from everybody, no matter if they're good or maybe the opposite, you'll always learn something and that you wouldn't have known before. And I think that's key for me. When I think about HR, it's always be learning, and that's why you mentioned it there. Always want to be investing in learning and development. Always want to be investing in leadership skills. And you said it there. The reason I've always pushed on leadership is pretty obvious. I'd like to invest in everybody's learning and development, and Liberty Global, Virgin Media, we do. But if you're really going to put in the biggest effort in learning and development, it has to be at the leadership level, because that's what's going to make the biggest difference to the most people. Because if you have a great leader, she's going to actually make the 10 or 12 people in the team have a better career. So, if you have limited resources, it's obvious where you should assign them. It should be to the leadership level. And then you can actually ensure that the company gets great results, a good leader gets great development, and more importantly, their team gets the benefit of the leader's upgrading skills.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? The where you spend your time and effort, but the practices that those leaders can perform, and I'm going to move you into the performance management practices here, which I think is of interest to a lot of people who join us every few weeks.
Sure.
What's your honest thoughts about how performance management is conducted today? And your face maybe says it all, but what do you think about the practice of it?
Well, actually, a confession. I have a master's in HRM and performance management. I don't tell too many people that, but I remember writing a thesis on performance management, and it highlighted a number of areas where it was really trying to measure the impact of performance management process. Did it actually improve skills? And I remember one of my main findings was it helped improve them for a while, but over time they actually fell back, which is a pretty disappointing result, but I have to be honest, I mean, it was an academic thesis. And I think, things haven't changed all that much, I think a lot of performance management is hit and miss. I don't think it's terribly well thought through. It's often not followed through. And sadly, I have to say, there's still plenty of leaders who really find reasons and time to be doing other stuff than performance management.
Yeah,
No, I think
it's the avoidance, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And if you survey people over the years, they'd always say, they dreaded review, and then you talk to the managers and they say, oh, I dread the review time as well. I think that's something we've tried to get away from in Virgin Media, and make performance management much more regular. It's much more constant, much more natural. It happens every month. It's the monthly one-on-ones, I think, that are the most important. And the weekly get-togethers, or the quick, cup of coffee, cup of tea, or now it's video conference, obviously. I think that's the stuff. When you turn it into a set-piece annual event, I think that's completely ineffective. Well, largely ineffective.
Yeah.
Good performance management has to be regular, has to be spontaneous. It has to be helpful. It should encourage development. I think we all know I think many of us know what good looks like. The question we ask ourselves is, why does that not happen why does that not happen 99 times out of 100? And there is quite a lot of factors in the mix there. It is ultimately a human process, so it is likely to large variation.
Yeah. And one of the things that I always thought you were really good at, sometimes I didn't enjoy that you were so good at it, but it was very natural to you to give constructive feedback. You always seem so comfortable giving it. But when we go into client sites, that's one of the first big problems they're trying to address, is that leaders aren't afraid to give feedback, but it's more often positive than not. And they're a little bit afraid of that. Well, afraid is probably the wrong word, but they're a little bit more reluctant to give that constructive feedback. Have you any advice around that, or how did you get to a place where you're so comfortable with it as a person who used to regularly receive constructive feedback from you? Seem to have a high comfort level with it.
Really? Okay, yeah. Well, this is a good question. I guess it's practice, I mean, you mentioned at the start, I've been around a long time, so I probably have a lot of experience. And I think it's like everything else, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And maybe not the better you get at it, but maybe you get more comfortable at doing it. It's like everything. You do it regularly, you become comfortable at it. Think about all the things you've learned through your life, some of the basic stuff like driving a car and all that. You don't get good at driving a car by just reading a manual. You get good at driving a car by going out on the road and actually going through all the pitfalls and sometimes the mistakes and the errors, of course, but you learn from that. No, but I do think this is a very interesting point, because I think the social media world that we live in now too, ironically, might be making this problem even more acute. Because if you think about social media, of which I'm most definitely not an expert, but a lot of it is funded upon endless amounts of positive feedback and liking and, encouraging. And in many respects, that's a great thing. Let's be honest. That's far better than like endless negativity, of which there is enough in the world without us adding to it. But unfortunately now, I think it's kind of drowned out kind of the realism aspect. So now everything is amazing and everything is brilliant. I don't know about you, but sometimes you hear about these events and you were either at them or somebody was at them, and you read the social media about it and you go, this must have been a life-changing event, and somebody says, oh, it was absolutely hopeless, actually. It was really bad. And you go, well, that doesn't make sense, because
Yeah.
I read 200 people saying how awesome and life-changing the whole thing was. And I think we're dealing with the downstream effects of that now, where it's all about sunshine. It's all about everything is happy clappy. And I think that can impact performance in companies. Because let's be honest, in the world we're in now and the amount of change that we have, things go wrong quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And things need to be changed and modified, and you need to learn from them. So I do think this giving and receiving positive and developmental feedback. I nearly said negative feedback, but that is the wrong way to describe it. Yeah. It's developmental feedback. There's nothing wrong with this old-fashioned word that I learned on a course back in the 90s when I was with Gateway, and it was critique. No, it's not criticism, it's critique. And there's a big difference. You should be able to give and receive critique all the time, because critique or feedback makes you better. You know, this cliche, breakfast of champions feedback. But a lot of people love to give the sunshine bit, and then when it comes to the slightly sticky piece, they tend to avoid it. Something we did, and I can't remember where we first started doing this, but I was telling it to somebody recently, and we were chatting about this very subject. It's like, I think it was a course we went on, but it was like, you give feedback to your peers, and then you finish by saying, would be better if.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that. Yeah. You know, would be better if. So it gives you a license to say, listen, Tony, this is going great, or listen, Aisling, you've done super here, but it would be better if. And so you can always add a bit on then. You know, like, okay, so 11 seconds was incredible, but wouldn't 10 be better? And how do we get to 10? I'm just using that as a sporting analogy, but even in the office, would be better if. And even if you ask people to always reflect on that, say, okay, that was good, but what do you think? How do you think it would have been better if? And you'd be amazed at what people fill in. Then they go, I hadn't thought of that, but I suppose if I'd have done this, I could have actually done it quicker, or maybe more people could have known about it, or maybe customers would have seen a bigger impact. And very quickly, it takes the kind of catching people out element of feedback to allowing people to say, the more I think about it, there's 6 things here that could have been better. And that's what I'll aim for the next time. So I think that's a very positive way to approach an age-old challenge, really.
Yeah, and I think it answers some of the questions that have come in here. So let me just jump to some of these questions, because they're pouring in for you here. Shauna, just to stay on this topic, Shauna is saying that giving constructive feedback where everything is virtual can be more difficult. Any thoughts or tips how to do it? Are you finding it more difficult these days, Tony, or now that you're on video rather than a face-to-face moment?
I think, we're all missing the human contact. It'd be lovely to sit down, have a cup of coffee. There were some days we were back in the office, ICT, well, our telecommunications, television business, we are classed as essential workers, so we are allowed to go to the office. Now, in reality, a tiny percentage of people are going to the office, but I had been going in and out a little bit, and it was really amazing to see people after 4 or 5 months and just sit down with them. It was really motivational. Yeah. But I think none of us would have chosen virtual as the ideal way to do this type of activity, but I think it's working better than any of us would have figured. I think, the advances in broadband, the advances in audio-visual technology have allowed it to happen. Listen, we got to go with this, so we have to make it work. Yeah. It's not ideal. It's not ideal, but what's the post-COVID world look like? Because you have to think beyond COVID now. You can't imagine this is going to persist indefinitely. I mean, you have to have hope. As I said to somebody recently, every week is another week closer to the end of COVID-19. Now, we don't know when that is, but it's a good way to actually approach it. It's step by step. So another 7 days down. But when it's over, how will we manage performance? How will we manage performance differently? But one thing's for sure, I think a lot more virtual work will be around. But I think we come together then more fruitfully and probably more effectively, so that when we do come together, I think it will be more effective. One of my colleagues, Campbell, sent me an article from the FT Probably send this to you later so you can circulate it to the group. But I thought it was one of the better articles I'd seen about working in the post-COVID environment. But they were mentioned that we won't all be back in the office 5 days a week and maybe never again. But now we'll come together for offsites or maybe for 2-day sessions where we do that once a month or once every 2 months, and we really drill down on stuff. And maybe that'll be a very, very productive and very good meeting. So I think it's quite exciting mapping out how the post-COVID world is going to look. But I think we none of us would have chosen this, right? But there's no doubt virtual is here to stay. Now, not 5 days a week. I couldn't imagine that could be the case. But we have to make it work. And I think the technology allows us to do so.
Yeah, I think people are embracing technology an awful lot more now to,
for sure.
To make it work and to make it easier. It's maybe focusing in on, managing the high performance and sustaining it through this crisis. There's some questions come in on this. So Nafu is asking, do you, oops, I've lost his question, hang on. A lot of leaders have usually too many priorities to focus on, and during the crisis, are you more focused on the financial side or the people side?
That's a great question. Certainly wouldn't be neglecting either, but I would imagine our bias, I think definitely our efforts have been more skewed towards the people side. We're quite fortunate in Virgin Media, Liberty Global. Our business is not massively affected by the COVID-19 crisis. Now, I'm not for a minute saying we're not affected, because there's been big impacts in, say, Virgin Media Television. Look at the advertising market, was down 50% in Q2. B2B has been impacted as well. But generally, more people are using more of our products than ever before for streaming, working from home. Connectivity has become, absolutely essential. It's like, like water and power into your home. So we're certainly not, I have huge sympathy for, say, the hospitality and retail sectors, who are, facing existential crisis as a result of this. But no, I think we focus on the people side. We've really upped the ante in communications because you have to. I was really very pleased recently. We did some employee opinion survey. Engagement has gone up to pretty much the highest we've ever had. I think it's at 85. And one of the things that's moved the most is seeing and hearing and learning a lot more from my leader, which is brilliant, because that I think that rewards the effort we've made in leadership development at the leadership level. Learning and development at the leadership level. But also there was quite a lot of good feedback about in communications. People feel informed, they feel up to date, they feel like they're being treated like adults, they're feeling like they're getting the necessary information. And some of the analysis that we did from our internal comms showed that our email and video and intranet communication is being opened and read a lot more than before, and quite a lot more than typical international benchmarks. So, that suggests that people, when the communication is right and the frequency is right and the material is right, they want to see and hear more, probably because they're feeling somewhat isolated and marginalized as they're all sitting at home.
Yeah, they want to feel part of something.
Yeah.
And the leadership scores going up is interesting. Is there practices that you bedded down early on? Like, did you insist on managers checking in with their people more regularly, or more regular team meetings, or what were the practices that might have led to that? Or did it just happen naturally?
Well, interestingly, we had started the effort on leadership learning and development well before COVID-19 struck. So in many cases, we were building on a decent foundation that we were already putting in place. But of course, it accelerated everything.
Yeah.
And the feedback I'm getting is now that people are actually talking, leaders are talking to their people now more frequently, more in groups and more individually in a more structured way than before. And a lot of that, obviously nearly all of that is through video. So paradoxically, maybe having to work in this way has kind of forced us all to reach out more, to make more contact, to check in. I was talking to somebody recently, one of our directors, and I just said, are team leaders checking in with people, especially with this second wave of COVID, which I think is taking an alarming toll on people's, mental health, and just generally it's wearing for everybody,
Yeah.
Especially if you're a customer service person working at home since March,
Yeah.
Not everybody has, homes and properties like us, and some people are sharing and cohabiting, and there's 3 or 4 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. That is tough. But the point I'm trying to make is, when I mentioned this to the people leader, he said to me, oh, well, my team's checking in with every individual on his team every day. every
Wow.
day.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. I mean, I was just hoping that there was something structured happening, but he was saying, oh no, they'd be checking in like every day. Have you got what you need? Is everything okay? How are you doing? So I
Yeah.
was hugely encouraged by that.
Yeah, it's massive, isn't it? It's the little human behavior, I think, that makes a difference. And that's, you know, when our clients adopt Tandem, it's putting the structure and the discipline on, you know, we give feedback here, we check in at this consistency level, we do our one-to-ones, we do our performance ones, we do our regular ones, and they have that kind of cadence around it. And it's that discipline that makes a difference, because people know I'm going to hear from my boss by the end of the week or whatever. You know, they're not sitting out there wondering if there's meetings that they're not invited to.
Yeah, I mean, I look when I just on that, when I look at Tandem, you know, I really like the features you've built in. I think yourself, Claire, I think you've built a great product. You know, I love the fact that it democratizes performance management as well. It strikes me as one of the best things about it is it puts people in control of their own performance, and that's probably a big problem I've always had with the phrase performance management, because the moment you describe it as that, it sounds like it's something that you do to somebody else.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, you know, and I prefer performance ownership, you know, because at the end of the day, it's not for me to manage somebody left, right, military style, you know. It's not for a team leader to watch and monitor and measure. I think these are all, these things belong firmly to the past. But if I can help somebody make better progress in their career, maximize their skills, make good decisions, and generally have a more fulfilling career, well, for me, that's performance ownership. And eventually, the manager almost disappears out of the process and is really only a mentor and maybe a coach and a guide to help with some of the bigger issues. But a person is actually taking control of their own performance. And that's what I liked about the tool. It struck me, it was very much of that, rather than like early performance management tools were really monitoring devices. You know, they were tracking people and watching them and showing when they made mistakes and showing deviations from benchmarks. Kind of grim stuff, really, when you think about it.
Well, it was very top down, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was
very top down. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be performance managing really anybody, but I'd like to help people manage their performance. That would be where I'd see myself, you know, making a difference.
Yeah, for sure. That is the fundamental assumption of the tool, is that it's two equal people, you know.
That was exactly the feeling I got. Yeah, that was the feeling I got. I felt it was more a relationship, performance relationship, rather than, you know, somebody's now tracking you as a member of their unit, you know.
Yeah. There's a few assumptions from the past that still live with us in performance management today that just, it doesn't work anymore, you know. So I'm going to go back to the questions because they're flying in and I'm not getting on top of all of them here. So Sean Kelly here says, hi Tony, Aisling, do you think working from home will have a negative impact on the culture a company is trying to create? You might have addressed some of this already, but any further comments on that, Tony?
Well, great question, Sean. The thing about COVID now, we're in a giant experiment in home working. I do smile when I see these articles about people saying this will never happen again, or this will, you know, and we're in a really evolving situation. The truth is nobody knows what the post-COVID landscape looks like. Everything is speculation and forecasting, and usually most of that is inaccurate. I think it will. I think it will impact the culture, but in positive and negative ways. And some of those trends are becoming obvious now, and others will take a much longer period of time to be obvious. I mean, the jury's out on this one. I do think we'll be working from home more in the future. I did say to you, Aisling, before the call started, I was thinking, I don't personally see a huge future in working 5 days a week at home, though. I don't think that would be good. I don't think a huge amount of people are clamoring for it, except maybe people who live fundamentally long way away from their office.
Yeah.
That would be very specific reasons. But I think there has to be the social construct of coming together, meeting people. And again, if we were to go down this route for a very long period of time, I think lots of problems will emerge in terms of isolation and marginalization that are not obvious now, but they will be time driven, and over time they'll become more and more obvious. And that will ultimately affect culture. So, you know, it's a great question, Sean, but jury's out on this one. The impacts for sure.
Okay, Anthony, thanks for your question. So Anthony Brennan says it's challenging for managers to give feedback and particularly bad news. Do you have any suggestions on how to encourage managers to deliver the bad news as well as the good news and not hide behind HR or more senior managers?
Yeah, well, listen, Anthony, I love it. Great question. Terrible to be hiding behind HR, by the way. I completely agree. I'm sure a lot of HR people on the call, it's terrible to see people devolve their direct responsibilities to the HR function. And I'm sure HR people generally are saying, why do we end up picking up some of this stuff? If leaders did what they did, we'd be able to concentrate on real value add stuff like talent management and performance management and all those other good things that are so important to the running of the company. But it's like everything. I said it at the start. You got to practice, and you don't. I don't mean practice in the live environment. You've got loads of colleagues. You could actually role play loads of these things. You can video them. You can play them back. You can look at what you said. You can check your language. You can do it with HR. You can do it with your boss. You can do it with your peers. You can do it with a trusted coach, internally or externally. There's a million and one ways to become better at doing this. There's no way anybody becomes good at this overnight and just walks out of a training session and is a great person at delivering critique. You got to practice it, and you never finish that practice. There's always things you feel you could have got better at. We're all in the same boat, but the sooner you start doing it and the sooner you practice it repeatedly, people become used to it. Your style will improve. I guarantee your results will get better. And I ultimately would guarantee too that most people on your team will buy into that and will appreciate that you're coming from a good place and you're trying to help them get better and be more effective in their career. And most right-minded people will welcome that attention.
Great. So Nafu has a really interesting one, I think, for us, which is, do you expect the same from HR as from the CFO and CMO, numbers and evidence? It's interesting, this whole debate about a data-driven culture, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I mean, controversial comment. One thing HR can suffer from is a lack of numeracy, right? Now, I'm sure there's a lot of HR people gritting their teeth now and rushing to do a Sudoku puzzle to prove that they're brilliant at maths. But generally, right, a lot of people in HR, and we're allowed to generalize sometimes, I don't think it's famous for being an area where you get great numeracy skills. But that's why you should use the technology, right? Because the technology will do that for you. So data and analytics, everybody's talking about them in HR. And some companies have made much more progress than others. I think there's great potential in this area. But I do think HR need to understand that they need to have the tools, the platforms and the systems to give them this information, because I'm convinced it's very poor use of HR skills and talents to have HR people with their head into a screen trying to manipulate a spreadsheet. I don't see that as a good use of HR's time. I don't. But that's not to say that we all want from HR specifics, accuracy, data that makes us go, oh, I never thought of that before. That's a very interesting trend. And I'm pretty sure all that data is there, but HR traditionally has not been great at excavating it. But now, thankfully, with technologies like Tandem and many, many others, we're starting to see the potential. But so far, a lot of it has been potential, and there hasn't been so much delivery. So I think many people are looking for HR to step boldly into this place, and I feel a lot of the HR people want to do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's massive on people's agenda now to get into a much more data-driven culture. Kay Harritine has a great question for you. It's how and what elements do you measure to evidence what you call high performance? Example, is it financial, sales, reviews, turnover? How and what is evolving?
Oh, well, it's all those things. I mean, one thing we use and we've started using it again, I'm very happy about this, because it was something that I think we used back in AOL, in a team I worked with back in the mid-90s. Balanced scorecard. I love a balanced scorecard approach, which builds from people and culture and talent up to customer, up to technology and IT level, but eventually it reaches the top of the pyramid, and it really is it's measured in financial metrics, then turnover, operational cash flow. But you can't just, it's not like a Jenga. You can't just pull pieces out and say, this is the bit I like and I don't care about the rest. It works as a pyramid because all these building blocks, and the fundamental one is culture and people, build up to delivering to your financial commitments. And I mean, it has to be about that. Unless you're in an NGO or a non-profit organization, and ultimately the score is you're measured in revenue and operational cash flow, and it should be. And, customer satisfaction is in there, but it only exists to drive the financial performance of the company. So, you look at the whole kaleidoscope of these measures, and I do think the old Kaplan Norton balanced scorecard is one of the things that will endure, and is something that you can use internally. We started to circulate that now to all our staff so that they see every quarter how their efforts and where their efforts specifically add into this and build into this pyramid of high performance. And of course, then some things are green and some things are amber, and sometimes some things are red. So you get to feel, you get an overview in a company for what's going well and what could be better. And I think if everybody has that understanding, it's more powerful than just 5, 6, 8 people sitting around a boardroom table making decisions in isolation.
Yeah. I'm conscious of our time. So in the last few minutes, I just want to pick your brains on, because you've had the kind of career that, many people would dream about. You are the kind of leader that lots of people want to work with. I still meet people from the O2 days who aren't working with you anymore who go, I miss Tony, I'd love to work for him again. So you have that kind of stellar career. And I'm wondering, when you look back, is there any kind of ingredients or tips you'd have for others, advice that you'd have for others in terms of building and leading high performance organizations?
Yeah, well, listen, that's it's a great question. Trying to think, yeah, I mean, I have enjoyed my career. I think, some things don't change. You had them when you started your career and you feel you still have them now. And I think I've always been pretty honest. I've always tried to do the best for the organization. And ultimately, I've never really been out for myself. I've always wanted high performance, and I've always wanted to be a leader of a high performance organization. But I didn't do it just for me. And I definitely didn't do it for the money. I see a lot of that at the higher levels. You see people that they're really out for themselves. It's all about them. It's all about their ego. And I think, if you can avoid those pitfalls, I think ultimately people respond to that. And most people get it, and they support your efforts. And if you can build that coalition of the willing, you've got amazing strength then, because it's not about you and your amazing skills or anything like that. I mean, that's impossible to sustain. That kind of hero leadership is something that we really always tried to move away from over the last 20 years. The hero who's doing everything and doing his work or her work for everybody else too. It's not sustainable. I mean, if you can make people better, if you can help them become better, and you can help them get better results, then, you're successful as a leader. I was thinking, preparing for this call, there's, I think I've had 12 people work directly for me that are now CEOs. And wow. That's something I'm very proud of. And it's actually 6 men, 6 women too. So it's...
wow, that's impressive.
I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud about. That I think in my own small way, I've helped people probably, or hopefully, achieve, to maximize their potential and maybe achieve more than they would have if I hadn't worked with them. And I think that's when you look back on your career, they're the kind of things you want to look back on, because it's about the impact that you have. Is it positive or negative? And of course, you make loads of mistakes, and there's things you did that you wish you didn't do. But ultimately, what's the balance sheet? Is it positive or negative? And I look back at AOL and even Gateway, and O2 definitely, and now Virgin Media. Yeah, I think there's. I get a great thrill out of seeing people on LinkedIn making big progress, and you remember them at the early part of your career, and you think of interventions or moments of that could have went either way, and you just remember back to it. It makes you smile, and you think that's great to see this person achieving the potential that we all knew they had. You know, that's for me the most fulfilling part of being a leader.
It's a great track record, and I can vouch for that, because being one of your people who moved on to being a CEO, I remember the day that you sowed that seed with me, and I think I would have, because you were a bit grumpy that day, and you were like, would you not think of moving on and being a CEO in the future, because Tree had bought O2 and we were talking about the future. And it's funny, it came back to haunt, because I had never thought of myself in those shoes at all, not being much of a numbers person, as you'd well know. And I always associated the CEO role with numbers people. Yeah. But it was interesting when we had to make a decision on Tandem and who was going to lead it, because, you know, there was 3 co-founders, we were all at the same level, but ultimately somebody needs to be the CEO. I think if you hadn't said that to me, I don't think I would have even stepped forward for it, you know. So and I think that's the power of feedback, isn't it? It's these little seeds that you sow that, you know, years later come back to stay with people and to go, maybe you have it in you to be a CEO. So yeah, it's a really powerful example.
No, it is a great example. I do think a lot of the things that we don't achieve are because of lack of self-belief. You know, feeling that, and maybe, you know, and maybe again in Ireland you're probably a bit more of that than say some cultures have completely the opposite. Again, that's somewhat generalizing, I know, but it's a feeling that it can't be me, it should be somebody else, and, you know, because I can't do these things. So it's almost like, you know, of the 20 things, there's 3 I can't do. But in reality, nobody can do all 20 things to be like supreme leader. You know, we've all got things that somebody else needs to be better at. So it's about acknowledging those things, but always saying, yeah, but listen, I've looked around, I've seen people who've done this job. Am I as good as them? I think so. Could I be better than them? Maybe. Could I give it a shot? Definitely. And it's true self-belief thing. I think if a leader can help people confront that themselves and look in the mirror and say, I think I can do this job, and I know I'll have the support if I do it. I think that's a super thing, you know. So it's great when it works out. It really is wonderful to see.
Yeah. I see Megan back on screen, which is a sign, I think, that we're coming to our end.
The time checker. Yeah, I think that's all we've got time for today. But thank you so much to Tony and Aisling for such a wonderful discussion, so thought-provoking, and great to hear about your wonderful career. So we also have a new white paper, which we are delighted to be releasing this week. So we will be sure to email you that after the session. And finally, we have the 3rd episode of our Tandem Talks on the 24th of November. So please stay in tune with our social media, where we'll be releasing details on the next guest speaker and registration details. So thank you so much both again for a great session. I hope you all enjoyed it. I certainly did. And have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everybody.